All right, so we're going to start off with our first sheet. This is our line chart sheet. Here you can see we have a bunch of data tracking some information for different libraries and their number of visitors over the course of a year. So what we would like to do is actually create a chart that's going to be suited for this data. So we have our data here, and this data is going to allow us to compare, but we want to visualize this data. So to visualize this, we're going to go in and select our data. So you always want to start with selecting the data that you want to create into your chart. We're going to grab the location information along with the months. We don't want the year because this is a total of all of the months. And we're going to just compare like the first 10 locations. So to do that, we're going to highlight, select, and we're going to just grab this information here. Once we've done that, we can go up to insert, and we can insert our chart. Now, you can always remember that Excel will recommend a chart based on your data, and notice how immediately it recommends the line chart. That's the chart we're going to use for this data. So I'm going to select line chart, and that's going to bring my chart into view. Down here, this window can be moved around. You can also copy and paste this window from sheet to sheet. So if we wanted to move this onto its own sheet, separate from the actual data, we could do that as well. But noticing and looking at this chart, we can see that the information is a little scrambled. So I'm going to resize this just to make it a little clearer. And there's a couple of different things that we notice from this data. We have all of our different locations down here at the bottom. We have each month. And then we also have our numbers located here. Up here in the chart design ribbon, we're going to notice that there are going to be extra information that we can change and adjust about our chart. So for example, we have different chart designs. So if we wanted to change the way that this line chart looked, we could make adjustments. This one is going to probably be a little difficult for people to read. They could probably read this section down here, but these numbers up here are just going to be a little harder. We also have this one with the numbers on top as well. I'm going to stick with my current one at this point. So what I'm going to do in order to make some edits to this chart is I'm going to go into, first I'm going to go into the axes. So right here we have our vertical axes. I'm going to right click on the vertical axes, and I have the option to format axes here. So in the format axes area, this is where we'll be able to make adjustments to the bounds. So for example, we'll be able to choose what the minimum is and what the maximum is. So right now our minimum is 0 down here at the bottom, and our maximum is 9,000. Because of the ways our numbers are spread, this minimum to maximum is going to probably be our best bet, because we do have this location down here that has a fairly low number set. We also are able to go in and make adjustments to the units. So the units are referring, the major units are referring to the numbers that you see here. So 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. And the minor units are going to be referred to the numbers in between. So right now we aren't able to tell what's going on in between each major unit. But if you, for example, decide to use tick marks, and we turn on the minor tick marks for the outside, you'll notice that it has a tick mark, and it's going to be for every 200 is where the tick marks are going to be. So that's what they mean by minor unit. If we wanted to, for example, change this to our minor unit is 500. So for every kind of half of 1,000, and we change that here, notice that our tick marks will change, and now we only have one tick mark in between each one. So that's what units mean when major and minor when you are working with charts. Next, you have your axis values. This is where you can adjust and change based on the numbers that you're working with. Automatic is fine, but if the data is supposed to be, for example, in some other display of units, you can adjust and change that here. So you can change, for example, what the display units are going to look like and all that kind of stuff. We also have our labels. Labels are going to be where we can adjust the labels for these areas. So we can say this is next to the axis. We can also switch to none if we want to remove those and not have them visible. But I'm going to leave that on next to the axis. And then last but not least, we have the number. So similar to the formatting on the home page when you're formatting your numbers here, this format is allowing us to change the format of our numbers in this axis. So for example, if you are working in percentages, but it's showing up as decimals, you will change that here. When you click on the actual data labels, this is going to bring up the Format Data Labels panel. Here is where we can turn on and turn off values. So if you do not want the values to be visible, you can turn those off. But we can also go in and adjust. So we can put, for example, the series name. So it'll have each one of the locations there, so on and so forth, and turn that off. We can also decide on where the label is going to be located. So if we do turn on the value, we can say we can have it be above, like so. And this will be really helpful in situations where the numbers are spread out and you want to see those clearly. So I'm going to turn off the labels for each one of these just to make things a little easier for us to see. So the other thing that we can do with our chart is that we can go into chart design and we can actually switch our rows and our columns. So if we go in and we switch our rows and columns for this particular chart, notice how that completely changes the way that the chart will look. So now the lines are showing us each month rather than each location, and what the data is going to look like per location. Let's see, we don't want any data labels, so I'm going to turn those off. We can also go and adjust our chart information. So if we wanted to turn on lines or have drop lines can be really helpful because they can help us kind of figure out where each location is kind of pointing. We can also turn on our grid lines here as well. So if you want to have your grid lines, do the primary vertical grid lines, so on and so forth, you'll be able to turn those on here. We can also adjust our chart type. So we can always change our chart if you want to change it to something else, and switch up what the chart is going to be. And then also, last but not least, you have the ability to adjust the format and colors of your chart. So here you have an option to change your colors. So if you click on the change colors options that you have here, you'll be able to change your colors. If these are not the colors that you want to work with, if you want to work with a different set of theme colors, first you'll need to go to page layout. And under page layout, you're going to choose different colors. So for example, if we wanted to work with these reds and oranges, we could see, and you can see automatically it's going to adjust the chart colors. This option here, especially if you have like brand colors that you want to work with, or you have specific color sets that you want to work with, you can actually adjust and change your color sets to suit the colors you want to use. And when we go back into formats, those colors are going to be available to us in our chart design. So if we go to the chart colors, you can see the new colors are what's available to me. So it allows me to quickly kind of change between what these colors are going to be for each of our options. So notice, for example, down here, I've switched my chart back to the different months with each line standing in for a different location. If you want to go in, say, for example, someone says, oh, this chart looks really good, but it's hard for me to see this light blue on the white background. So this one line, we may want to change that to something a little bit different. If we want to do that, we don't have to stick with the colors located here in our chart design area. We can actually switch that to something else. So to do that, you're going to click on the actual data point. So here I've clicked on the light blue line I have here. And since this is a line, I'm going to go in and switch this. And if I switch this to the fuchsia, it'll switch that line color in my data point. So you're able to change your colors to anything that you want. You can also adjust the weight of each of these lines in format. So if you wanted something to be thicker or thinner and adjust the different elements, all of that can be done inside of format. See, you can see here it's adjusting series B. We can also go in and pick out other parts that we want to format and adjust and change as well. So if, for example, we want to adjust the chart area, the chart area is going to be this whole area. If we want the background to be a light gray, we can switch that to a light gray. So the format is going to allow you to make some really kind of in-depth changes to your chart in terms of look and feel, especially if you are trying to put something together that is going to be seen by a bunch of different people. Because what that's going to allow you to do is make unique changes that are going to either make your chart more accessible or make your chart a little bit easier for people to kind of read and get through. Same thing here with our pie chart. So same data, but this time we're going to do a pie chart based on the year to date. So I'm going to go ahead and select this data here. And I'm going to insert a pie chart. So, okay. So let me go ahead and zoom in on this pie chart for you guys. All right, so we have here our pie chart. Notice that our pie chart has all of our different locations. It's a little easier to separate all of the colors out in a pie chart, so that's also really nice. But notice down here at the bottom, our series doesn't have the each location label. So what we want to do is we want to click on that area here. And we're going to change this from saying 1, 2, 3, 4 to having the actual location names over here. So to do that, we're going to select this area. You're going to right click and you're going to select data. When you click and select on select data, that's going to allow you to go in and look at the legend series. We can choose and change the different names that we're looking for our chart. So our name is located here, and then our Y value is located here. The horizontal chart or category axis labels, this is what we need to fill in. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this icon to select our source. We're going to go to location, and we're just going to go from 2 all the way down to 18 in our chart, and that's what we're going to select. We're going to fill that in, and when we fill that in and select OK, you're going to notice that down here at the bottom, instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, we now have it associated with the actual location for each one. We can also go in if we want to change, for example, so now that this value or this series is associated with the different locations, and then we can further make this a little bit more legible and a little easier for our audience to read by going into the chart design and adding the chart element of the data labels. And we can choose where the data labels are going to be located. So we can do a best fit. And the best fit means that it'll just kind of fit based on how large the cell is. But I prefer to kind of put them on the outside just so that we don't have to worry about legibility with the colors and clashing and all that kind of stuff. So now we have our different numbers out here labeled. We can do the same thing that we did before. We can adjust and change our colors. So the way that this works, because we have so many data points in our chart, we'll notice that it'll do the brighter colors, brighter version of the colors, and then it'll go into the darker versions of the colors for each one. So we can make adjustments and changes to the different slices. So for example, if you wanted the Chicago Library numbers, so everything with an asterisk is considered part of the Chicago Library system. And not just all of the libraries altogether for the county, then you would be able to go in and highlight those particular ones and maybe make them all a certain color or something like that. So you have your options. You can use your formats like you did before. And we can also go in and adjust our chart labels if we need to. So if we wanted to highlight a particular data point, or we wanted to have a particular data point stand out, there is a couple of different ways that we can do that with our chart labels. So if we right click and we go into format data point, this is going to bring up the format data point axis. And what we can do is we can do a point explosion on this particular pie chart. So if I do a point explosion, it'll pull it out from the pie chart. So if you are kind of comparing your location, or you are comparing a particular data point to the group, you could say, okay, this is our point. And then you can, you'll notice that the data will kind of pull itself out by using the point explosion. If we wanted to move this on the chart, so for example, where it was originally is considered its 0 point. And if, so say for instance, you were doing a chart and you wanted it to sit here, and maybe you'll put like a comment on top of the chart, a text box or something like that, and have a note about that location. You could do that and turn that on and off. So this would allow you to move the data around in the circle. It'll move the whole circle, but it'll allow you to kind of change where that data point is located in case you wanted to have it in a particular spot in order to put some kind of information next to it. Next, we're going to talk about pivot tables and pivot charts. So here we have a bunch of different data. And what we're going to do is we're going to create pivot tables and a pivot chart from this data. So just like we did before, We're going to select our data. This time we don't actually have to do a full select of the data. We just need to select inside of the data. And once we've done that, we're going to go up to insert, and we're going to select pivot table. Now, when we select pivot table, what's going to happen is it's going to ask us what the table range is for our pivot table. And so you'll want to make sure that it's selecting all of your data down here at the bottom. So we have our data here. It's pulling from the correct area. So that is what we want to do. We also want to make sure that we are placing our pivot table. So you're going to always place your pivot table in a particular area. So this can be either a new worksheet or an existing worksheet if you have a worksheet that's already been created. I'm going to say a new worksheet is where I'm going to put this pivot table. I'll click OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my pivot table in this area. Okay, so the way that pivot tables work is you're going to, even though we have all of this information here in this table here, maybe we only want to see certain kinds of data in our actual table. So what we're doing with this is we're basically saying, I'm going to have you, Excel, go in and pull particular kinds of information. So let's see, we want to capture the region data. And we're going to have that sit in the column. So you're going to select your data. And usually when you do this, as you're kind of working and pulling your stuff together, Excel will kind of logically put things in different places. So if we check representative, it's going to probably put them under the different regions. And then if we put in items, we can have the items will show up in a particular region. But each of these items can be moved into other locations. So for example, if we wanted our items to go into our columns, then we have here the region and the representative, and then we have in our columns we have our different items. With pivot tables, order is going to be important. So you can see here that your representatives are first, and then their region is after that. But maybe instead we want to have the region be above. So we're just going to click and drag the region above the representative. And notice how that then goes in and changes what our each label is going to look like. So now instead of it having each of the representatives and their location, we have the location with each representative inside of it. We can also take region and use it as a filter. So if we place it here under filters, this is going to allow us to go in and make adjustments to our changes there. So up here, we would have our regions. Notice that we have a new thing that pops up here at the top. This is going to allow us to filter between each region. So if we wanted to just see the central region, we could do that. So it's unselect, central, and you'll only see the central region. And that's because of the change that we've done up here. Essentially, what this allows us to do with filters is it allows us to filter out our data based on certain points. I'm going to instead move region back where I had it in rows because I want to be able to see that information all the time. Filters is basically how we want to adjust and change out the information. And then columns is our items that we have for each location. Now, notice that we don't have any numbers here, and that's simply because we haven't put in any numbers for our values. So down here is where we're going to put in the actual values. So we're going to move our totals. Notice how it will pull in your totals and it'll pull in sums of totals. So if we wanted to find, this is the total number for central for binders. Let me just zoom in a little bit, makes this easier to look at. So for example, we have central location. This is the total for all our binders. So it's going to add up all of our information for every one of our representatives, but it also shows us the number of representatives for each one. We have the total number of desks purchased for that region. And then we also have the total number of pens sold for each region, so on and so forth. This can be changed or adjusted depending on how you want to change and adjust this. So for example, if we click on the eye icon is going to give us even more things that we can adjust and change. So here, if we did sum is going to allow us to keep track and totals out our data for us. But we can also, for example, I'm going to do cancel and remove totals, and we're going to change this to units. And so we have our units here. And if, for example, we wanted to count and do a count of units, this is the number of times that pencils appear in Andrew's. So he did, he sold one binder, or he sold, let's go back to the chart. We'll find Andrew's. So Andrew's only, let's see, pencils, Andrew's binder. So Andrew's, he sold binders once inside of the table. So that is what we're seeing here. We're seeing the number of counts that binders show up for Andrews. Andrews sold binders once, and he sold pencils 3 times. That's what we're doing when we're counting the units. But if we switch this back, so if we click on the little eye icon, if you're using a PC, it's going to have a little arrow there instead. And if we switch it to sum of units, it's going to be the number of units sold for binders. So in that one time that Andrew sold binders, he sold 28 binders. And in the 3 times that he sold pencils, he sold 155 pencils. So we can also capture other kinds of information from the data. So if we didn't want to capture particularly sales, so if we wanted to remove the representative from our sales, and instead we wanted to just look at units and units cost, we can then go in and say, let's see, we have desk pen sets, and then we want units here under the rows. So if we put units under rows, this will give us our data labels, and we probably need to have, yeah, we probably need to switch this. So I'm going to switch these, and I'm going to have my items here. And then we're going to make sure that the items are above the units, like so. So we have binders sold. This is the number of units, 4, 7, 11, 28, 29, 26. We can also go in and add our order date. for the units. So this will make it easier for us to see. And then as we've added in our unit dates, it's added in our dates. It's added in extra information for us. We just need to go in and remove that information because we only want cancel. We only want certain amounts. So we're going to remove this field. We're going to remove the quarter field, and we're going to keep the month field. And with that, that allows us to track what happened in January in terms of how many units we were able to sell of what item. Then in February, we sold, so this is what we sold in January. This is what we sold in February. This is what we sold in March. And this is what we sold in April. So pivot tables are designed to allow us to take data like this. So maybe, for example, you are working with a check-in, check-out system, and the check-in, check-out system is only going to capture, the line is going to capture whatever is checked out and checked in and all of that kind of information. The pivot table allows you to take that data, so raw data like this, and make it essentially make sense by finding things that are similar in the information. So when we pull the rep, it gathers all the information for that one person called Jones. When we pull the region, it gathers all of the information for that region that is east, and so on and so forth. And it allows us to kind of go in and capture our data in different kinds of ways, to gather information in or show information in different ways. And then it puts in these filters, and the filters allow us to go in and adjust how we can see the data. So if we didn't want the order date to be as visible like so, we can switch this. We could put this under our filters for months, and then we can say, I just want to see the sales for January. And then that allows us to see what our total sales for January are. So we're also going to take this data and work with a pivot chart for this data. So that means essentially using raw data to create our chart here. So in order to do that, what we'll need to do is we'll need to select inside the data like we did before. We're going to go to Insert, and this time we're going to do a pivot chart. So we'll go over here to the charts area in the ribbon, Insert ribbon. We're going to select Pivot Chart. Same thing as before, you're going to notice that it's going to ask for the table range. And then this time, instead of doing a new worksheet, I'm going to actually do existing worksheet. And the existing worksheet we want to be, you can actually choose the table and range for the existing worksheet. So we're going to go into sheet 1. And I'm going to select my range as being F18 to M18. So we're going to do F2. We just want to have it sit right next to our chart. Then I'm going to click OK. And this time is going to bring in my pivot table or my pivot chart and place the pivot chart in this area. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. So this is pivot table 2. Notice it's in the same area as our first pivot table. Okay. And this time we're going to go in and we're going to add in our same information. We want to put in region. So I'm going to start putting my information in. Notice how our our information has adjusted and changed. So right here, we have our axis or our categories. We have our legend or our series. So I'm going to have the region information here, and I'm going to put the representative information here as well. Okay. So we have our region and we have our reps, and then we want to put in our totals. Move. There we go. So our axis information or our categories down here at the bottom, those are being controlled here. So I put in the different regions for each one. If I switch these, so if I put the regions here and I move my representatives here, then we have one for each person. And what region they are a part of is going to be the corresponding color. So if they're blue, they're a part of the central region. If they're orange, they are a part of the east region. And if they're green, they're a part of the west region. And then that allows us to capture their units per individual. We can also go in and make adjustments. So for example, if we wanted to filter by rep, or filter, so we're going to put our here, and we want to filter by region, then what that's going to allow us to do is you'll notice that you have all of your representatives and their totals located here. And then you're going to go up here to your regions, and this is going to allow you to change and see only the central region. So representatives who are a part of the central region will be visible here. We can change this to the eastern region. So the same thing that we did here with just our table, we can now do with also our chart and change what that chart looks like as well. And this just gives us flexibility when we have data that is kind of raw and it has duplicates and it's not sorted in any particular way. This is what allows us to kind of work with pivot charts and work with pivot tables and stuff like that. We can also then go in, and when we're working with our chart, if we wanted to change what the chart looks like. So for example, instead of being the sum totals, maybe instead we want to look at items and units. So we're going to remove this field as well. And this time we're going to bring in the different items. And we want to cover the number of units for each item. We're actually going to move this over here. There we go. So this time it's showing us how many binders we've sold versus how many desks we've sold, how many pens, pen sets, and all of that kind of stuff. So we can see here that we have a small number of desks, but if we added unit cost into our data, then not only can we track the binder units, but we also have the cost of the unit inside the same data. And that doesn't really make any sense. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. We just have the total per unit. So that is pivot tables and pivot charts. All right. So the last thing that we're going to cover today are slicers or timeline slicers. So here I have a pivot table that's already been created um, with our data and all that kind of information has been added into it. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to place in our timeline slicers. So timeline slicers or slicers are um, really just filters, but the way that they function inside of the workbook is they function by being buttons. So in this case, we're going to select slicer first. And it's going to ask us to insert slicers based on certain information. Um, so this case, let's do rep as our slicer. We'll click OK. And so now we have what is really just kind of a menu or a button that's going to allow us to make changes to this chart without having to go into the pivot chart area like this and finagle with the fields in order to filter something out. So it's just a more visually friendly way of including filters or this area. So slicers can be really useful in situations where you're creating a dashboard and you want something that people are going to be able to interact with fairly easily. So if someone is, for example, going to be looking at your dashboard and looking at a bunch of different tables and data, but you don't want them to have to fool around with pivot tables. You don't want them to have to change things around, move anything, but find information inside of, for example, a pivot table. If they need to, for example, see what Andrew's sales were um, for the year, then they would be able to pull that they sold binders and pencils, um, and that this was their total sales for the year. If we wanted to see what an individual did, so we can see what Kivel did. And this allows us to kind of set up our filters for someone. So we can clear all of our filters here and make adjustments and changes to that. So I'm going to go right click. We're going to go into slicer settings. So right now in the slicer settings, we have the name. We have the header. Right now it says rep. If we want it instead, we want that to say um, we can do that. We can also see, okay, click OK. So now up top, instead of using a shortened abbreviation, we can switch that to saying the full name in our settings. And then with slicers, I'm going to bring in a second one. So I'm going to click inside my data, go to insert, and I'm going to insert a slicer. We also can create slicers based on multiple things. So that was just the representative, but if we wanted to do representative and we wanted to do month, we click OK. So that's going to bring up not only a slicer for the representative, but also a slicer for the month and date as well. So I'm going to remove this one. And we can take this, and this will again control this particular chart to just show us what was sold in January, what was sold in February, and so on. But for months, this may not be the best visual. So instead of using this visual, we're going to delete this. And we're going to go into insert, and we're going to insert a timeline. So insert a timeline based on the order date. And what this allows us to do is adjust the chart so that we only see, so for example, if we only wanted to see from October, let's see, we want to see this in quarters. So if we only wanted to see Q2 to Q3, it'll show us all of the information for Q2 to Q3. And then we can also say we want to only show Kivell, and we know that Kivell didn't sell anything between Q2 and Q3 because with both of these on, we're not seeing anything. But we do know that Andrews sold pencils between Q2 and Q3. So when you're working with slicers and you're using timelines, they actually can be working together to do multiple filters in your data. So I'm going to clear filter, a clear filter, so we can get all of our totals back. And again, this is for if you want to make the data information interactive, but it's something to be used when you're sharing data with people who may not use Excel as extensively as you, but they still need to be able to read the chart and read the data. And then the last thing that I'm going to cover today are macros. Macros are designed for you to be able to automate steps in the creation and working with data, especially if you have data that you work with all of the time. So we go under automate. We can do a record action. So let's see. Yeah. We want to go under view and we're going to record a macro. Okay. So before you click record and you start recording what your macro is going to be, you need to be clear about the steps that you're going to do. Because once you start recording, everything that you do, every little oops, every little undo, it's going to basically copy that. So I'm going to do a macro in this data. We're going to just do conditional formatting. There's a couple of different places you can store a macro in. You can store the macro inside of the current workbook. You can store the macro in a new workbook, or whenever you have Excel on your computer, there's going to be something called the personal macro workbook that will basically be a workbook that is holding all of your macros. So if you do it in the personal macro workbook, what that's going to allow you to do is use the same macros from workbook to workbook or worksheet to worksheet. So I'm going to do the personal macro workbook. You can also assign a shortcut key to your macro if you want to. So this would be Option Command, and this has to be a letter. So it can't be like the number 7 or something like that. It won't really recognize that. And then you can also write a description for what the macro is supposed to be doing. So this is a macro that is going to, we're going to do a conditional format to color. And remove that. Click OK. So now you can see up here that button that was for record macro has started to record. We're going to go into our home page. We're going to do select the data that we want to put our conditional formatting on. So in this case, I'm going to do January. I'm going to say, let's do conditional formatting. We're going to do a 2-color conditional formatting. Now this is the time when you want to make sure that the rules that you set are all correct and all that kind of stuff for the macro, because that's what the macro is covering as well. So if we want to make sure that the rule is set up in a particular way, we'll adjust and change that as well here. So we'll go in and edit the rule. We want this rule to be our highest value is here, and our lowest value is here. We'll click OK. Then we're going to go back to view. We're going to click on stop recording. And now what we can do is for each one of these, if we had like a specific rule set for conditional formatting, or we had a specific kind of formatting for our conditional formatting, we could do that as well. So then we can go in and we can say view macros, and then we can select the macro that we want, and we can say run it. This is not working the way it should be working, or I'm doing something wrong again. Yeah, but macros aren't something that you use all that often unless you're repeating the same steps over and over again. Then you can use them to automate particular steps and use them. And when you record a macro, the other thing that you're going to be able to do is assign that macro to an image. So you'll insert, for example, we can insert a icon or a shape. And then when we right click on that icon, we can assign a macro to it. So in this case, if we assign conditional formatting to it, click OK. I'm going to clear the formatting on this. And then when I click on this image, it'll format the image with the format, because that's what the macro recorded. So I find that this is actually really useful, again, when you are working with like a group of people to analyze something. And say, for example, we wanted to put in notes or edits for the document. We can actually record certain kinds of formatting into a macro. So I'm going to go to data. I'm going to view, record macro, edits. We'll click OK. Go home and select and bold, and we're going to highlight this in an orange color, and that'll be what the macro is. So then we'll go back to view, stop recording. Right click, assign macro. We're going to assign the edits macro, click OK. But that is macros. So to edit your macro, you're going to go in and view your macros. We can show our steps. This is going to open up the Visual Basics.